detention of enemy combatants is to detain someone indefinitely because they deemed suspected terrorists. Although this tactic denies due process, this tactic is necessary for securing national security.
The process of indefinite detainment is a necessary process and an effective process at that to ensure the principles stated in the Constitution. They help ensure domestic tranquility and they protect the citizens of this nation from attack from outside people. And first of all, I would like to give a legal argument as to why the indefinite detainment does not violate any large principles. For the first reason most people will cite, the first document most people will cite, is the Geneva Convention. Right. And the Geneva Convention does state that you cannot indefinitely detain people, but there's certain restrictions on this, which I will give you now. First of all, in the very preamble of the Geneva Conventions, it is stated that this is an agreement between nation states to follow these. The terrorist organization that America fights against is definitely not a nation state because they are not operating any government or any nation, and they are really trying to overthrow and establish their own thing. So, additionally, in Article 4 of the Geneva Convention, this is once again supported through this line, and I'll quote, "Nationals of a state which is not bound by the convention are not protected by it. Nationals of a neutral state who find themselves in the territory of a belligerent state and nationals of a co-belligerent state shall not be regarded as protected persons while the state of which they are nationals has normal diplomatic representation in the state in whose hands they are." This means that nations that aren't that have not signed the Geneva Convention are not bound by it. And secondly, things that are not nation states are also not bound by the Geneva Convention. So once again, the terrorists we are fighting and definitely detaining are without a doubt not bound by the Geneva Convention. In addition, another document that people often cite is the Fifth Amendment or the Fourth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution. But let me remind you, this is the United States Constitution and it only applies inside the borders of the United States. And in the very preamble, it says that it is established in the United States, and the terrorists we fight are foreign terrorists and they do not operate in the United States. And secondly, as this is also supported through both Supreme Court cases and through lower level court cases, such as when the Tucson court ruled that the Fourth and Fifth Amendment do not apply to a Mexican kid who was across the border since he was not in U.S. soil. And once again, the U.S. Supreme Court in the United States versus Verdugo Rodriguez has ruled that the Fourth Amendment protections do not apply to searches and seizures by United States agents of property owned by a non-resident alien in a foreign country. This, once again, states that the U.S. Constitution does not apply outside of U.S. borders. And once again, this is also supported by other things such as the Atlantic Charter, which says that we cannot force our ideals on other countries, and the idea that our Constitution applies across the world in the Middle East is once again, without a doubt, forcing our ideals on other nations. I'd also like to make a moral argument. Morally, the very definition of morality, according to dictionary.com, is a particular system of values and principles of conduct, especially one held by a specified person or society. And key word being society. Society creates morals in order for the further benefit of society and to push society forward. And in that case, when we fight against terrorists, we are effectively, when we indefinitely detain them, we are effectively preventing them from going back, killing more people, and we are pushing society forward by preventing people who, in their very name, terrorists, people who are trying to inflict terror on people of society. We are preventing them from doing this and thus being moral by helping society.
Okay, so I just want to clarify. You think that I just don't want to get anything twisted. You think that indefinite detainment is morally okay and justified under the Fourth Amendment? I believe it was. You were saying that.
Yes.
Okay, and the.
I didn't say it was justified. I said the Fourth Amendment protections do not apply to that.
Okay, right, and the Geneva Convention.
Yes.
Okay. So I view Article 3 of the Geneva Conventions, as does what I believe to be the people who wrote the Geneva Conventions, to say that detainees were entitled to at least minimal protections.
I cited Article 4.
Okay, well I understand. I'm sorry, I'm going over Article 3.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So, I mean, I believe that terrorists, they should be subject to the Geneva Conventions, because the rules against torture were created based on, like, what's okay and what's not okay due to do to your enemy. And humanity, as far as the Geneva Conventions go, conclude that torture is simply not okay. But while terrorists may have a different idea of what is right and what wrong is, it shouldn't be a reason for us to change our morality. And I also heard you were talking about.
I would like to interrupt for a second.
Go ahead.
I was speaking about indefinite detainment, and not to be rude, but
Right.
I don't think that it's synonymous with torture, because you can indefinitely detain someone without torturing them in the process.
So in a perfect world, I that is correct. But through the if you've heard of the Guantanamo detention regime,
Guantanamo Bay?
yeah, the Guantanamo Bay. Yeah, exactly.
Oh, sorry. I was never mind. Just cut this out. All right.
Okay. So it really just destroyed America's credibility, and it led for years of recovery for our respect, because it didn't do exactly what was supposed to happen. I mean, several detainees have alleged torture, and the operations of this camp are considered to be a major breach of human rights. It's really not abnormal to believe that this could happen again. This can and would lead to a similar idea of American exceptionalism, which is much more important than having a few people receive justice. I mean, looking at this, indefinite detainment could lead to unlawful containment of other people, because in an ideal world, you are correct, this wouldn't spread, but unfortunately this just isn't realistic. There's factual information from time to justify this, which quite frankly is more trustworthy than either of our opinions. And if we're going to, because I will give you about the Fifth Amendment, I think you're absolutely correct about that, but I feel like talking about just the history of how this is operated, I feel like it just proves that overall indefinite detainment is unjustified and immoral. But if we're going to look at the future, I can say that, I mean, we spend about half of our government documented budget on our military, so there are other ways to defeating terrorism than holding people indefinitely. And this also, again, in a perfect world, it wouldn't do this, but unfortunately, America just, it's unrealistic to think that this could lead to unlawful containment of other people. And it could also make a very bad precedent, because it could lead to a lot of people in society, which has already started to happen, believe that all people of similar religions and ethnicities of stereotypical terrorists, that people judge them very quickly. So it could lead to a lot of discrimination to these types of people who are legal citizens and don't really deserve to be discriminated based on religion or ethnicity.
So in the legal form,
Right.
do you believe that the Geneva Convention, was that your, like, what do you believe the convention should say, or what it does say?
I believe that's what it's implying. It doesn't specifically state that, but I think that's what it's trying to imply, and what the people who wrote the Geneva Conventions are trying to convey.
I would like, I understand what you're saying and the moral reason behind this, but I would have to disagree.
Okay.
The Geneva Convention was particularly stated to make sure that the nations would agree to work together. It was not meant to be a moral document that forced people accountable, or it was not supposed to force nations into this. It was supposed to be a way that the nations would agree to do this, but if the other nation does this to you, you don't have to force yourself to do this. To give an example, like, if another nation was attacking us, like all our troops, in ways that were against Geneva Conventions, we would not. It would just be unable to. If we fall back using the Geneva Conventions, it would be harder for us to win. And one of the major purposes of the United States government is to protect the people. And if it can't do that, then it's not fulfilling its purpose. I would also like to state that indefinite detainment has proven to be extremely effective. through both statistics and both through the methods in which they are done. But to give like I said before, morality is defined by society, and because society created it, further society, and by saving lives, this is definitely both moral and helpful and effective. So to give first I'd like to start off on a small scale. Society already, and most people would agree, that if a person broke into my house tonight, I have a right to defend myself from that person. Of course, I could like shoot them if they were threatening my life, or if I didn't shoot them but I managed to get them detained, I could contain them for as long as necessary until the resources came. Would you agree with that? So if I could keep them and I could keep them in a corner and tell them don't move, and keep them there until the police.
Thank you. I believe that this discussion has gone on long enough. So
Okay.
the Constitution states that these amendments that people should have a fair trial, and so this indefinite detention does not allow this, and so that's why this is not allowed anymore.
Can I finish one of my points?
Yes, you can finish it.
So this idea that you're allowed to protect your life or keep someone from going out and harming other people is allowed on a small scale. For example, like I said, if someone broke into my house, I'm allowed to detain them until the necessary resources arrive. This is exactly what indefinite detainment is meant to do. It's meant to keep these terrorists, let me remind you, the original prompt says, indefinite detention of enemy combatants. So we're not capturing suspected terrorists, we're capturing enemy combatants for terrorism, so they're already attacking us. So they're fighting for a cause that is trying to force their morals on another nation by inflicting terror. So by us detaining them, we are just merely containing them until the necessary resources to release them or give them punishment arrive. And this has been extremely effective since the NDAA, which allows this, was signed in December of 2011 for 2012. And if you look at the statistics for terrorism, in 2011 there was 12,533 terrorist casualties worldwide. But in 2012, after this attack, there's a massive drop to 11,098, which is, according to Statista.com, which is a reliable source that sources from more than 22,500 sources. And that's a massive 12% drop worldwide from fatalities. That additionally, the amount of terrorist attacks worldwide dropped by an even more massive 34%. These showcase how this indefinite detainment was showing the drop in terrorists. It was preventing innocent lives from being killed. So to relate to the point before, if a person can protect their single life from attack by others by detaining them, why can't the United States detain people to protect 1,100 lives?
Can I counter, or are we out of time?
So what I'm trying to state is
Yeah,
that
of course.
it's against the Constitution to detain people.
Right.
So I'd like to go back to my point for that, but like
And
I
we're also out of time.
Okay.
So we can cut that out.
all right.